Thank you very, very much, Michael. And thanks to the organizers for inviting us to be part of this Global Ecumenical Fellowship. I think it's a very important conversation we're having. The picture we have in Europe, of course, is differentiated in all the 47 different countries we have on the European continent. But a lot of it looks pretty similar and also similar to other regions of the world, as we've just heard. Let me use a couple of examples. What Seth has been referring to as hygiene issues. Yes, refugees, migrants arriving in Europe have very great difficulties washing their hands if there's one bathroom to 200 refugees in a camp. Or it's very, very difficult to keep distance, social distance, if you're 6 in a room of 8 square meters. That makes it very, very difficult and increases vulnerability. Some people could telework, work from home. But if you're in the service industry, if you're in the care sector, this is very, very difficult. So there's lots of studies which show that Black, Asian, minority ethnic people, for example, in the UK, are overproportionally affected by COVID, both becoming sick and also dying for it. Lots of migrants and refugees in Europe found themselves all of a sudden behind closed doors and behind closed borders. Many European countries closed the borders, wouldn't allow ships to disembark anymore, and kept people out. And that's both people coming to seek protection or people who've already been admitted to the territory. Visas were cancelled and similarly. So indeed, in becoming invisible was one of the problems. We did have a lot of issues of scapegoatism, first towards Asian people, then any kind of migrants. And of course, there were many, many problems related to the existence of the church. Lots of churches were all of a sudden stopped from their religious practices in a worship. And what we found that international churches, or tradition as they used to be called, migrant churches, were particularly affected by it, no longer being able to meet on a Sunday, no longer being able to do collections. So it very much impacted the life of refugees, migrants, people on the move in general, but also the churches and communities they're part of. We have, of course, seen multiple vulnerabilities for women and children. As it was already said, behind closed doors, there was very, very much an increase in abusive situations, in situations of gender-based violence. And once again, very little of that was publicly seen because it was happening behind closed doors. And we're only now understanding what happened in spring and March. Some of the strategies we have chosen was to give visibility, simply saying it's not only COVID. There's still people seeking protections. There's still people looking to come to the European continent, and they're knocking on our doors, and we should respond and not close the eyes and close the borders. Very often practical access was possible for churches in situations where no one else would be allowed to go. So it was important to go to people, tell them they're not forgotten, help practically with items, but also simply sit down and say, we're in fellowship. You're not forgotten by the world and by the church. It was important that churches showed solidarity. Churches in the Netherlands had set up a solidarity fund for migrant-led churches to help them pay the rent, for example, because they might not have a church of their own. And what was also important, and I think that's one of the few positive examples, is to say, look what migrants are doing for European society. It was a bit ironic that Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the UK, who was always had a very xenophobic and limited migration policy, when he came out of hospital from COVID treatment, said, thanks to my nurses, a nurse from Portugal and a nurse from New Zealand. So I think that offers some possibility to turn it around. But I think what's also important in Europe, and we're only in the middle of it, is to understand what this means for us theologically. Is this the apocalypse we're talking about? What is our understanding what COVID does for us, what God wants to tell us with the apocalypse, and also to address theories like, oh, if you're faithful, COVID won't harm you, and also address the difficulties, things, what does it mean for our community if we can no longer be in Eucharistic community because we're not allowed to get together or to drink from one cup, for example. So there's a lot of practical implications. I would see a chance to rethink some of our relationships. I would see a chance to think coherence in society, but that is something we need to take forward and saying, COVID was a warning. Can we come out of it better? As one of the candidates of the US election said, building the continent, Europe, better. So I think that's the challenge we have with the churches and society at large. And I think we should address the difficulties and highlight the chances. Thanks.